People aren't talking enough about what just happened, and that silence is exactly why this matters. Because when someone like Charles Hoskinson speaks, especially about crypto risk, market structure, and long-term consequences, it's not noise, it's a signal. And if you're involved in XRP or crypto at all, this is something you should hear calmly, clearly, and without panic. Right now, headlines are moving fast. Social media is louder than ever. Everyone wants instant reactions, instant takes, instant conclusions. But that's not how real understanding works. Real insight comes from slowing down and listening to what is actually being said, not what people want you to believe was said. Before we go any further, take a second and lock in. This isn't about hype. This isn't about telling you what to buy or sell. This is about understanding risk, structure, and the direction this entire space is moving. And if that kind of clarity matters to you, make sure you're subscribed and hit the like button. It helps this kind of grounded content reach people who are tired of fear and exaggeration. Now let's get into it. Charles Hoskinson didn't come out swinging at XRP. He didn't attack a token. He didn't make price predictions. What he did was something far more important and far more uncomfortable for many people. He talked about systemic risk in crypto, about how narratives can blind communities, and about how regulation, perception, and technology collide in ways most investors are not prepared for. And that's where the warning really lives. Crypto has matured enough now that the biggest threats are no longer obvious scams or broken code. The real danger is misunderstanding how power, regulation, and infrastructure interact. It's assuming that being early automatically means being right. It's confusing community confidence with institutional certainty. XRP sits right at the center of that tension. For years, XRP has been discussed as a bridge between traditional finance and the crypto world. That alone puts it under a microscope. Anything that touches legacy systems attracts scrutiny, expectations, and pressure from multiple directions at once. What Hoskinson highlighted indirectly but clearly is that crypto projects don't exist in isolation anymore. They exist inside political systems, legal frameworks, and global financial incentives. And those systems do not move based on tweets or price charts. That's where many retail participants get caught off guard. People assume that if technology works, adoption is inevitable, but history shows that adoption depends just as much on trust, governance, and alignment with existing power structures, sometimes more. This doesn't mean XRP is doomed. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed to succeed either. It means the conversation needs to be more mature than up or down. One of the most important points that came out of this discussion is how dangerous narrative absolutism can be. When communities convince themselves that only one outcome is possible, they stop managing risk. They stop asking hard questions. They stop preparing for alternative scenarios. Markets punish that kind of thinking relentlessly. Charles Hoskinson has spent years building in this space. Whether people agree with him or not, his perspective comes from watching multiple cycles, multiple failures, and multiple shifts in regulatory tone. When someone with that experience says the space needs to be careful, it's worth listening, especially now. The US regulatory environment is changing, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably. Crypto is no longer a fringe experiment. It's being evaluated as financial infrastructure, and infrastructure is held to a completely different standard than speculation. XRP's long legal and regulatory history means it will always be part of that conversation. That can be a strength, but it also comes with expectations that many investors underestimate. One of the biggest misunderstandings in crypto is believing that clarity equals instant growth. In reality, clarity often brings constraints. Rules define what is allowed, but they also define what is not. Projects that survive that transition tend to become more stable, but less explosive. That trade-off is something many people aren't emotionally prepared for. Another warning embedded in this discussion is about centralization of narratives. When too much attention is placed on a single event, a single ruling, or a single statement, the market becomes fragile. Everyone watches the same thing. Everyone reacts at the same time. Liquidity dries up, volatility spikes, and confusion takes over. That's not healthy for any asset. XRP's community is large, passionate, and deeply invested in its future. That passion can be a strength, but it can also create blind spots. Hoskinson's broader message wasn't "this project is bad." It was "be careful when belief replaces analysis." That message applies across crypto, not just XRP. Another layer to this warning involves how misinformation spreads. Short clips, edited quotes, and exaggerated thumbnails turn nuanced conversations into emotional triggers. People react before they understand, they share before they verify, and suddenly the market is responding to a distorted version of reality. That's why long-form, calm discussion matters. When you strip away the noise, the core issue comes down to this. Crypto is entering a phase where survival depends less on speed and more on alignment. Alignment with regulators, with institutions, with real-world use cases, and with public trust. Projects that adapt to that reality may not move fast, but they may move far. Projects that resist it entirely may struggle regardless of technology. This is not fear, this is transition. Another subtle but critical point is how market participants interpret authority. When influential figures speak, people often hear confirmation or threat, not context. They assign intent where none was stated. That's dangerous. Hoskinson didn't say XRP will fail. He didn't say crypto is finished. He warned about structural weaknesses, governance risks, and the cost of ignoring reality. Those are warnings worth hearing. For XRP holders, the smartest response isn't panic or celebration, it's reflection, asking whether expectations are realistic, whether timelines are grounded, whether risk is being acknowledged honestly. Markets don't reward denial, they reward preparation. As this space matures, the conversation will shift from what could be to what can actually function at scale. That shift is uncomfortable because it removes fantasy, but it also creates durability. If you've made it this far, pause for a moment and check in with yourself. Are you reacting emotionally to headlines, or are you building understanding? One leads to stress, the other leads to clarity, and clarity is what protects you when markets get loud. This isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a more serious phase. What happens next depends on how projects respond, how regulators act, and how communities evolve. No single voice decides that, but voices like Hoskinson's remind us that ignoring hard truths has consequences. And once you accept that this is a more serious phase, the way you listen to conversations like this completely changes. You stop looking for heroes and villains, and you start paying attention to incentives, structures, and long-term consequences. That shift alone puts you ahead of most people reacting emotionally on social media. One of the uncomfortable realities Charles Hoskinson was pointing toward is that crypto can no longer afford to live in a bubble. For years, this industry thrived on being outside the system, criticizing it, mocking it, and promising to replace it. But now that crypto is large enough to matter, it has to deal with the same pressures every major financial system faces. Regulation, accountability, transparency, and governance are no longer optional topics. They're unavoidable. This is where many communities feel tension, because decentralization as an idea doesn't automatically translate into decentralization in practice. Power concentrates, influence consolidates. Decision-making often happens among a much smaller group than people realize. Pretending otherwise doesn't make it less true. For XRP specifically, this tension is amplified. XRP has always been positioned closer to institutions than most crypto projects. That positioning creates opportunity, but it also creates dependency. When you work with large systems, you inherit their pace, their constraints, and their politics. That reality doesn't care about community enthusiasm. Hoskinson's warning wasn't about any single company or token. It was about what happens when people underestimate the cost of legitimacy. Being accepted into the financial mainstream doesn't just bring capital, it brings oversight, it brings compromise, and it brings expectations that many crypto-native participants aren't used to. This is where misunderstandings explode online. Some people interpret caution as betrayal, others interpret realism as negativity. In reality, caution is often a sign that someone understands the terrain they're walking into.